Hello, everyone. Welcome to our November edition of Adeva's Fireside Chats. I'm really excited to have Andy Polhill here with me today. He is a development manager at Shopify, and he will help us understand the whole process of transitioning from a developer to an engineering manager and everything it took him to get to that stage. For those of you that are new here, listening to the event for the first time, Adeva is a remote network of tech professionals. Our vision is to enable work without boundaries, to enable people to work on exciting projects regardless of their location in the world. And this is the same with these events that we're organizing. So basically, enable people anywhere to learn from industry leaders like Andy here today and Shopify and similar companies. Before we start, you can share your questions on this link. You also have it in the stage of the event. And at the end, we will circle back and answer all of the questions, try to answer all of the questions that you share there. And also, if there's anything in the meantime that fits well in the conversation, we'll also bump it in. Andy, welcome.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me on. I guess a bit of an introduction to myself. So I've been working in technology for longer than I care to imagine, quite a few years. Over the time, I've worked for companies of very different sizes, so really early phase startups, more established startups, mid-sized companies, and then sort of big enterprise companies. So a real range of stuff, a real range of industries as well. So I've kind of mixed it up quite a bit from like telecommunication companies, travel companies, government work, tech companies, and probably some other ones that I've forgotten, so apologies for that. My discipline's also shifted a bit. So I started off as a back-end developer writing Perl, went to front-end, went back to writing Java for a while, then went back to front-end a bit. And then more recently, I guess the last sort of 5 years or so, shifted more towards the engineering management side of things. And so shifted my discipline in that direction. My background before work, I don't have a computer science degree. I think it's kind of worth saying because that sometimes comes up in conversations and it might be a theme that we touch upon a bit. Then outside of work, I live on the south coast of England, a small town called Worthing. I have 2 children that keep me busy and do a bunch of kind of other activities like a bit of rock climbing, a bit of surfing when I can. I think that's me.
That's great. Amazing introduction. You recently joined Shopify as a development manager. Before that, you were working as a head of development as well. Can you share with us what are the main responsibilities? I guess both of the roles are pretty similar. And then how does it differ from what you've been doing before as a developer?
Cool. Yeah, so I've been at Shopify, I think about 2.5 months, or coming up to 3 months. So still kind of learning the ropes quite a lot. And at Shopify, it's relatively different in that I'm an engineering manager or a development manager, as we call it, and I don't have a team yet. So my team is starting soon. So that's definitely a sort of a stark difference. And another part of what we do at Shopify is the engineering managers get involved in actually sourcing people and finding people to grow their teams. So that's been kind of a new challenge for me and surprisingly fun. Like you'd think it might be a nightmare, but generally contacting kind of random people that you find on LinkedIn and asking them for a chat has been sort of a fun part of it. Sourcing people, learning the tech stack as well at Shopify has been sort of good. Luckily I've got a bit of time in my calendar to sort of do that at the moment. So when my team starts, I'll be nice and relevant. And then in time, I'll start to kind of get my more engineering management skills kind of back into play again. So kind of getting one-to-ones going. We're starting to kind of work on strategy for next year, starting planning. So I guess a lot of stuff like that. But my kind of first experiences with Shopify, the time that I've been here are generally really good. So it's big. I think we're like 10,000 plus employees, which is similar sized company to I've worked for in the past. But it feels like one company, which is quite nice. So in the past, like big companies can often be split vertically, with those verticals not really communicating with one another, to try and make things manageable. But it often doesn't feel like one company. Shopify feels like one company, like everyone's kind of in on the sort of the common goal, which has been really nice. And that one company thing means there's a few other things that play into it. Like from the tech point of view, the scale is so much bigger than anything I've worked on before. Like you look at the number of pull requests going into the big Rails monolith that we have, and it's kind of like a frightening amount. But it manages it well. There's loads of internal tooling teams. the help with the CI pipelines, so we're kind of shipping to live multiple times a day. But the scale is definitely kind of a thing that's been new to me, but for other people, it's kind of relatively familiar. So it's also the first job I've started remotely. So that's kind of an interesting challenge in that, I started probably remote working when most other people did at the start of the pandemic, and was arguably a bit sort of skeptical before, but I quickly converted when I got a feeling for how much kind of effect it has on my life, I guess. So that kind of part of starting somewhere new is interesting in that you don't go in for your first day and meet 50 people and then forget all their names and have so many conversations. It's a bit different from that. You almost get to control it a bit more. So depending on your capacity for how many video calls you want to do in a day, like some people might reach out to like 5 people and have a chat, and for me I can probably do like 3 or 4 of meeting kind of brand new people, and then the listening gets a bit heavy. But that's quite nice part of it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Does Shopify plan to stay remote, or will that change soon?
Yeah, so Shopify kind of really sort of committed to remote working. There's no kind of intention of opening offices, but we're kind of investing heavily into kind of making it work, and just making sure we don't go stale on it as well. That we're always trying new things out and experimenting. I don't know if you've seen, there's a little, I can't remember what it's called now, a Shopify party, which is like a little virtual world that you can wander around in. So you can go on kind of one-to-ones and race little cars around a go-kart track and things like that. Cool. But also occasionally going to meet in person. So we have a thing called bursting, which is where like a few times a year we'll kind of arrange to meet up in person and get to know each other from that point of view. Maybe at the start of a big project we'll go and hang out somewhere and really sort of understand the challenge and how to do it.
Back to the role that you have there. So in terms of collaborating with other engineering managers, what's the structure there? How do you ensure, like working in a company of such large scale, how do you make sure that you are well synced and that everyone is aligned? I mean, from what you could understand from the short period that you're there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess the first thing that I did when I started was go and like find some peers. So I looked within, obviously Shopify's huge. So I looked within sort of our part of Shopify that's called Core Engage, and looked within there for different engineering managers in that group, and thought, right, I'll try and talk to them. And even in that list, there's kind of 30 people or something. So just kind of pick a few random people, have a chat with them, and ask them who they think I should chat to next. And sort of build up a bit of a network that way. But you never know for certain whether you're actually going to work with some of these people because it's slightly random. But then as the projects come in, that's when you can sort of do a bit more relevant sort of project discussion. But in terms of keeping in sync, I guess it's like writing things down is important. And the younger developer in me is surprised by that. I used to hate writing documentation, but now I kind of understand the importance of it, especially across time zones. And that's kind of a way of keeping all in sync.
I guess it's the same anywhere where the organization is that large. You need to rely on documented sources, otherwise you just can't function.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think just try and keep it to one side or 2 sides, not like a 50-page document that no one reads.
Can you tell us a bit about the journey that you took from software developer to becoming a development manager, the challenges, important skills that you've acquired over the years, and essentially what helped you become successful as a manager?
Yeah, cool. I guess the first part is the actual getting that first role, and there is a certain amount of luck kind of in that getting that first engineering management role. But it's important to say that it's not all luck. Some of it you can sort of make your own luck on it. So it's positioning yourself in the right place. Are you doing kind of mentoring? Are you reading up and learning some of the skills that are required? So that's kind of a part of it. And then also chatting to your lead and kind of let them know your intentions. But then also, I guess you have to look at your surroundings as well. So the company that you're in, if the company you're in is a high growth company, they're going to be recruiting lots of people, new teams are going to be spinning up. And with that, there's going to be more opportunities. So there is luck, but it's also a case of kind of having a look around and making sure that you've got yourself in the right position. So that when the opportunity arises, you're there. So, I had a few false starts on that, kind of just like line managing 1 or 2 people. And then eventually sort of took the plunge when the team lead role became available in my current team. And I think that's the case with a lot of people. So there's challenges there when all of a sudden you're elevated to leading the team, and the people that are once your peers, you're now kind of managing them. So I think that's an interesting challenge. But the opposite to that is to suddenly be transplanted into somewhere and be the engineering manager, and then you've got a different challenge in that you have to sort of build up the trust. Whereas in the other one, the trust is already there, but it's just that sort of that dynamic shift in relationships. So eventually, kind of.
How did you deal?
Sorry, go on.
How did you deal with that, like becoming a manager of people who were your peers until yesterday?
I think generally, like if it's been done well, most of your peers will be happy that it happened. They'll be happy to kind of see you elevated to that position. But there might be people within your team that also went for that role, and so that is a challenge. And I think that the best place in those early phases is to chat to your lead that put you in that position in the first place, and get their help on it. Like, you're going to need a bit of help early on with things like that. So yeah, like, you got to deal with any unrest and try and make sure that everyone's kind of got the same common goal in mind, definitely. But yeah, the skills, I guess, like, there's lots of kind of people skills that you pick up in time, and those people skills have to change, because it's one thing getting on with everyone, but as an engineering manager, it's not necessarily your job to get on with everyone. Sometimes you have to make tough calls and have awkward conversations, and that's a skill that I sort of definitely had to learn. I think I considered myself to be good with people, but then you realize actually you've got to have these difficult conversations, and the longer you postpone them, the harder they get. So you've got to get those conversations in early and get more familiar with that side of things.
How would you suggest that people approach it? Yes, that's, I guess, the most difficult task when you become a manager, and then you need to decide, I don't know, who you get on your team, but even more difficult if you need to let go of someone. Do you have any tips for people who are just, they've found themselves in this new role and now they have no idea how to work with it?
Yeah, I think the main thing is trust. I probably mentioned that already, but like, building up trust with your reports is really important. So I've had to go through some situations with staff members on improvement plans and that kind of thing. And the main thing is, I think, for them to understand that you want them to do well, and you're kind of working with them. You're not out to just get them or manage them out of the business or that kind of thing. Like, you genuinely want them to do well. And so when you're having those slightly awkward or tricky conversations, it's for them as well as the team around you. So but I think you need that level of trust first, so they sort of believe in you, that's where your intentions lie. And that's just, I think, comes from one-to-ones is kind of a key thing, especially remotely, that kind of that one-to-one communication and just sort of seeing where they go. And in time, definitely practicing, like, the more one-to-ones you do, the more useful they get. Like, they don't always hit the mark with every one-to-one. I've certainly come out of some and thought there's probably nothing useful covered in that one. Mm-hmm. But in other ones, you're always kind of building up that trust and that relationship, which helps. And you can kind of chat to them about how they want feedback as well, and then start to try that out with them. But definitely get it in early. That's one of the things I learned is relatively early on as an engineering manager, is if you don't get those conversations in early, they're just going to compound, and then it's going to be so much harder when you finally do have to deal with it.
Yeah. When you started, was it like organically becoming a lead from developer, or did you go through some training and some formal part?
Yeah, so I think kind of in the early days, I started off just sort of line managing one person here or there just to sort of try it out. And I think in those times I went in probably a bit early. I think I was probably a senior or mid-level developer, and I thought I wanted to do it because it felt like the only way to progress. But I don't think the timing was right. Like, my heart wasn't in it, because those kind of management skills just didn't seem particularly tangible in comparison to the development skills. So just, you write some code and the thing appears on the screen, that's great. Whereas management didn't sort of feel that way. And I also thought, like, I think in my early years, management was kind of a negative word. I think, you're the sort of the archetype of a manager. It's often isn't always that great, where it's portrayed in Dilbert cartoons and things like that. So I think sort of getting my head around that. So after a few false starts, then I did have some good training with sort of peers at the company that I worked for at the time, and that had some some good kind of like role play scenarios of surprisingly awkward to kind of pretend to be the belligerent employee. It's quite funny, but that kind of helped to kind of win me around, and having a good mentor leading me at the time as well has really helped to steer me in that direction. But I would say, sorry, that the training is good, but the actually doing it and occasionally making mistakes and messing up is the way you really learn, because in the theory is really sound and you get it, and it's not until you sort of do it or make a mistake in real life that you're like, okay, this is how it works.
Yes, definitely. I had a follow-up question, but it just slipped my mind. Oh, yes. I wanted to ask you, do you remember the beginnings? What were the things that you started with? I'm guessing at first you needed to maybe mentor more junior developers, do code reviews. So some tips around giving feedback or how to do proper code reviews properly in a way that people don't feel threatened, but they actually understand they need to appreciate the feedback and improve. So like things like that you've learned when you were starting with the transition.
Yeah, so I think code reviews is kind of relatively like an easy part of the transition, because you're probably doing that already as a peer sort of senior dev, and so as an engineering manager, I think my code reviews don't have any more priority over anyone else's, potentially even less, as I've sort of dialed down my tech skills. So that side's kind of fine, I think, and then the other side is the sort of the giving feedback part of it, and that is something that, like I said, I found really sort of challenging to start with. But the more you do it, the more familiar you get with it, and also like doing the positive feedback as well. As like feedback shouldn't always be negative, so giving praise and finding out how people want that praise as well, pretty key.
Right. Cool. You mentioned rock climbing. I know you love to travel and visit different places, especially places that are different than your hometown. What are the things that you learned over the years through your personal experiences, like something that you didn't learn on the job that actually made you better as a manager?
Yeah, cool. This is one of my sort of favorite pet subjects. And I think sort of going back a bit, sort of before travel and things like that, I guess my background before working in technology, I did so many sort of random jobs. Like I worked at McDonald's for a very long time. Can we say company names? I did anyway. I worked there for a long time. I worked at a prison for a while. I worked in a fire door factory. I worked in a job nights where literally I was just drawing boxes around addresses on envelopes. I don't even really know why I was doing it. So I kind of done so many weird jobs before I finally kind of breaking through into tech that I think that all plays into it. It all kind of plays into the way, the different situations that we put ourselves in and how we have to interact with people in those situations. Be them kind of like mundane ones. You can imagine working at McDonald's, some of the interactions that you might have. That I think all of that helps you to kind of just be adaptable. So yeah, there's kind of random experiences, and I think also things like travel. It's a bit sort of cliche to like traveling, but for me that's been really sort of positive in terms of like I come into conversations like this to maybe be a bit sort of a bit nervous, a bit worried about how it's going to go, and then I think about things I've done in the past, and that's I kind of put things into perspective quite a bit more, I think, and you kind of keep relatively balanced on that side of things. Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see from other people as much as we can as well. I think in tech things are getting a bit kind of homogenous. Sometimes CVs come through. I've worked with agencies that format all of the CVs, scrub the names out, which is good to remove a bit of bias, but then they start to just kind of look the same. And sometimes that paragraph that you have at the end of the CV that tells you a bit more about a person can be really interesting. It can be where sort of the differentiators are, and the different values maybe that they'll bring to the team. So it's a precarious place, right? Because there's potential biases in that section. So you need to constantly be aware, of your own biases, and not just go, oh, this person likes rock climbing, I'll just recruit them. You got to be sort of careful with it. But I think it's the things that make us, make people kind of, they can bring different things to the role. When I was doing a bit of sourcing the other day, I found a profile of someone that was like a poker player, like a high level poker player. I was thinking, wow, like I wonder what they would bring to the party in terms of a meeting or one-to-one with someone that was like a professional poker player. They weren't looking for jobs, so I didn't contact them. But I think that's all the kind of thing that can just help to create a really diverse team, diverse in terms of the way we think about it. We know diverse teams are really important, but also just that diversity of experience and the kind of life experience.
Yeah, this is very interesting, and we're faced with company cultures that are emphasizing the need to work hard or just favoring people who work hard. Have you noticed, like, I'm not sure how it was in your personal experience, but it's probably more difficult for people who want that work-life balance or want to experience other things outside the job to advance in their careers. What was the case in your scenario? Was it you were just lucky to be in a company that I don't know, cared for that as well, or did you have to do something to prove yourself and make sure that you are valued equally with someone who maybe worked, I don't know, 80 hours a week?
Yeah, so I think that kind of notion of like hard work culture has shifted in a positive way in time, but certainly kind of looking back a few years ago, it seemed to be that the culture of presenteeism, or just like the amount of time spent in the office, is an indicator of how much work they get done. Feels like happily it's dying off. I'm sure it's not died off everywhere. But generally nowadays, I feel like, if you're just focused within that time and you've got a kind of laser focus and you're planning your time, then you can get enough kind of work done during those standard working hours that can still help you develop. But certainly kind of going back in years gone by, I would go and do stuff and I would know, like, if I went traveling for a year, that's going to slow my career down for a year, probably, because I'm not at work for a year. But that's kind of, it's a personal choice, I think, and you have to kind of get that balance between what you want to achieve both in work and out of work. So yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes a bit of sort of sacrifice, but I think we're getting better at that side of things.
Yeah, and I think as the company started working remotely, they value the output more than the actual working hours, because nobody can be certain how many hours you put in a day. You're not at your desk, and they can't judge you by when did you arrive or when did you leave the office. So hopefully this will change drastically over the next years.
Yeah, it's had to shift to trust, basically, and so some people had to learn some pretty sharp lessons, like a couple of years ago. And I think a lot of people thought, like, what's going to happen? Everyone's going to work at home, and largely, I think people found out that nothing happened. Most people, and the vast majority, got on with their work, and that trust was formed, I think, by sort of force in some cases. Yeah, I think trust-based, and I generally sort of say to people that often people don't really care kind of how the work gets done, as long as it gets done. So if you want to go and do some sports activity in the morning and start work a bit later, no one really minds, as long as the work gets done. And then if the work doesn't get done, that's when people probably start to sniff around a bit more and go, okay, well, what, why isn't work getting done?
Right.
It's almost like the interface has changed, like, into the way we work. Like, the interface used to be maybe a manager looking at your desk and seeing you're there, whereas now the interface has had to shift a little bit to kind of looking at what's actually getting done, which is probably a healthier way, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. For people who start this, switch from a developer to, and let's start with just a team lead position, for example, not straight to an engineering manager, because you need some steps to get there. But it's often overwhelming to get on this extra responsibility, and now they don't know how to balance the things that hands-on development maybe, or things that they were supposed to deliver until yesterday, and now they all of a sudden they have all these meetings to attend, people to mentor, or reviews, whatever. So and this can easily escalate and become a burnout. So what are the things that you would advise for people who are just entering a more leadership role? How to balance between these things? How much of the development work they're used to doing should they give up, or how to essentially reinvent their new role?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, like, before taking the role, ideally, check out the expectations a bit. The expectations, I think, vary quite a lot from company to company. In terms of what an engineering manager does, it's actually, I think companies have very different perspectives on it. Before I interviewed at Shopify, I looked at a couple of other places, and during the interview process, there was no like pair programming or technical. Well, there was technical stuff, but no pair programming. And they were like, that's because engineering managers won't code. And I've seen tweets from people saying, if you have an engineering manager that codes, you don't have an engineering manager. I was like, wow, I don't know, that's a bit full on. Like, I think it's okay to still, you've still got to remain technical, and you probably still want to code a bit because you spent years and years learning those skills. That to ditch them overnight isn't probably isn't what you want. So getting the expectations in, finding out like maybe what the balance is in terms of contribution versus managerial activities, and then breaking up those activities a bit as well, just to see what percentage are going to be in different areas in terms of like strategy, line management, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that bit's. Sorry, I got distracted temporarily by visitor. That's kind of a critical part of it. So getting those expectations right, and there is an exercise you can do. There's like a Patrick Kuo article I've seen that has I think it has 4 different kind of main responsibilities of an engineering manager, and you can kind of go through with your peers and kind of mark what you think they'll be doing. So getting the expectations right first, like before you start, so at least the people around you have the same expectations as you. And then when you get started, that's kind of on yourself then really to make sure you don't put too much pressure on it. So I think I made the mistake that probably lots of new engineering managers did, of just trying to carry on developing as well, maybe pulling in big tickets, and then those tickets get hung up as you start to do engineering management stuff and development stuff, and your team get cross with you because you're kind of holding up a critical ticket. So you quickly learn then, okay, I need to remove myself probably from the critical path. Maybe you could do small sort of critical path stuff. And generally then I would focus more on, I guess, technical things that would help the team. So it could be bug fixes, workflow improvements. I got really into pipeline stuff because sometimes the teams, wouldn't necessarily have the time to go and improve the pipelines. So you can kind of work on the enabler stuff, but remaining technical, definitely. I think my younger developer self encountered quite a few managers who would say to me back when I was a manager, and that was something I think as a developer, like a little piece of you dies whenever you hear that. So I certainly I'm trying to kind of keep alive to be a developer at the same time. You're never going to be as good a developer as maybe you could be if you were purely technical, but to still be a developer. And I think, like at Shopify, we see Toby, who's the CEO, and I think was an original Rails contributor, still kind of very technically active and still asking relevant questions in random Slack channels, which is always a surprise. But he's certainly kind of a good role model for that propagates through the company.
Nice. Yeah, and this is a great advice because the developers I've worked with, oftentimes they struggle with this. So this is the most common scenario, like wanting to carry on as much development work as you used to, and now on top of it, add all the strategy and meetings and everything else. So it's impossible.
Yeah, I would say as well, we chat about pull requests, but reviewing pull requests is a really good way of remaining technical because someone else does the work for you and you just get to read it and pretty much learn everything that they did, but with a small fraction of time. So reviewing pull requests, and your peers will like you for it because then the pull requests can get merged, unless you have tons of comments, and they probably won't like you as much, but it's definitely a good part of it.
Right. I think we touched a bit on this, but maybe just as like a more concrete answer or a tip. So when it comes to helping the team be effective or mentoring more junior engineers, what are the most important responsibilities that an engineering manager should take on?
So I think for me as an engineering manager, I'd like to play that role as the coordinator and the facilitator. So making sure that discussions are kind of being had, and that like refining the strategy as well, so that everyone knows the strategy, the goals are clear, kind of no one's idle, everyone's kind of has the same common goal and is working towards that. That's kind of your responsibility as an engineering manager to make sure that is all kind of set up. But it isn't necessarily making the decisions yourself. It's kind of chatting to your team members and listening to them, and you're almost disseminating that information and trying to filter it and work out what the decisions to make based off what they've said. So certainly don't come in and just sort of assume that you know the way to do it and tell your team how to do it. It's more like the team know how to do it, and it's for you to work out which one of them is right, or what combination of things are right, with your own intuition sort of built into it. And I think that's why having a technical experience is good, because you do have that intuition that you can play to your advantage. And then in terms of junior members, I think just giving them time, right? That's kind of the main thing you can do, is just give them time, and it's time that's invested well. I think you'd be surprised at like how much that investment comes back to get you. So pairing is one of the things for juniors, I think, especially while remote, is really, really important. I'm always amazed at how quick how quick some junior people skill up. It can be pretty amazing. And pairing, like at Shopify, we have a random channel where you get kind of given a random contact every week, and then you meet them for like a coffee chat and just find out where they live, a bit about what they work. And I was paired with a developer intern, and they said straight away, we're like, can we do some pairing, and can you drive the pairing? I was like, I've been here 2 months. I don't know what I'm doing yet. So we did it anyway. I had a problem that I needed to solve that I thought was going to take a couple of days. And just pairing with them was so good for me, because I was sort of talking out loud about the stuff that I was coding, which forces you, I think speaking out loud of that forces you to be sort of analytical about it. So for me, I got so much more done than I thought I was going to. And they went away really happy, having learned a bunch as well. So, like pairing with someone more junior, you can be the beneficiary as well as the junior person. So that's, I think, probably the biggest gift for juniors at this stage.
Like learning from teaching.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And they can ask kind of, make them comfortable to ask questions, like what they think might be silly questions, because they might not be. And that's how we can learn.
Okay, great. We have some questions from the audience. So the first one, are there any books that you would suggest on this topic, that would be useful for people who want to learn how to be effective managers?
Yeah, so Manager's Path is good. That's, I think, Camille Fournier's book. That's one that's kind of really good, because there's a few management books now that kind of focus on purely technical management. There's currently James Stanier's book that's also really good. I think it's called How to Be an Effective Lead. But that's also really good. It kind of talks through the journey. So both those books touch on some similar things. So they're really good. I think also Radical Candor is something that I've read. I've kind of forgotten who wrote that now. But that was a really good book for me in terms of the sort of the behavioral side of it, and giving feedback and getting your head around how to do that, because that's certainly a challenge. There's another one as well. It's called Crucial Conversations. So that's a book that's been around a while. But I think my main takeaway to summarize that book is it talks about the physiological things that happen when you're going into a conversation. I think when you understand that, we're all just still cave people at the end of the day, and that's kind of how our brain works. Like, we haven't necessarily evolved around the as fast as the environment we've created for ourselves. So that kind of fight or flight mechanism, I find myself in conversations where I could feel myself kind of, like your brain starts to cloud over a bit as that fight or flight mechanism kicks in. So just at that critical time when you want to be thinking really sharp, your brain and your body is completely failing you. And I think for me that's really useful, because I could feel it happening. Okay, this is why this is happening, because essentially I'm still just a cave person trying to deal with the situations that we've made for ourselves. And it may not be for everyone, but I sometimes find that physiological kind of aspect of like learning kind of why and how we respond to things can be really good.
Yeah, I can imagine that's very helpful when it comes to dealing with people.
Yeah, I think so. I was reading a bit more about dopamine the other day as well. It's kind of the reward drug. I think there's like 4 reward drugs, and dopamine is kind of one that you get from coding, because that's, I guess, the difference between coding. You have a very short feedback cycle in terms of you write some code, you see a thing happen, and you get your reward, and that's quite nice. Whereas in engineering management, you do a thing and it may not come back to you for days. It may not come back to you at all. Like it maybe just didn't work. But then sometimes it does. It's a longer feedback cycle, and I think you have to sort of train yourself to expect that. But then when you do finally get that sort of dopamine hit, that reward, it's kind of nicer in a way, because you had to work a bit harder for it. It's less of a quick win. But
yeah, you just need to probably learn how to notice it and kind of focus on what you've achieved afterwards, because oftentimes it's easy to forget, like, okay, turning down fires, and then I just completely forget about what the outcome is of what I did.
Yeah, and sometimes you're kind of like, I wonder whether I did that or not. When someone does an amazing thing, you're like, I wonder if that's because I had the conversation with them, or whether they just would have done it anyway. It's certainly less than exact science, I'd say.
That's great. Let's see. How has your relationship with your reports changed when managing remotely as opposed to in person?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think whether it really did much or not. I mean, certainly in person, we'd often go for kind of walks. Like I was a big fan of kind of the walking one-to-one. And in one of my previous offices, we had a nice park just outside. So we could sort of do like a lap and a half of that. And that was kind of nice, just to sort of be out and about, like in physical format. But I don't think the relationships changed too much when we're remote. But I guess the difference could be there is that I knew these people beforehand, whereas the new reports I'll have soon, will be sort of fully remote to start with. But I think it's probably, putting in a conscious effort to have the random conversations to get to know them, because you won't necessarily have that. You won't have the classic water cooler chat so much as we used to. So if in a one-to-one you just go straight into kind of the meat of it, you're never going to kind of create the opportunity. So I think you'll creating the opportunities to get to know one another, not necessarily just in one-to-ones, but kind of other things. I find the other social things that we can do virtually or meet up when we can. They're really critical, because I think the more you get to know someone in real life, the more that trust kind of builds up, and the better your working relationship can be.
You'll get a chance to see how that goes now that you set up your team from scratch.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be kind of an interesting bit. And I think, with a new team as well, like everyone's got to get to know each other in each other's quirks and kind of the bits. Some of the early management training I did kind of teaches you about the different personality characteristics. And that's quite nice, because, you can go through your life thinking that someone's maybe like a bit of an idiot. But the reality is they're just coming to things from a different angle than what you are. And their personality type is very different from yours. And so when you become more aware of that, you're like, hey, we're clashing here because we're sort of different people and we approach things in different ways. So you learn to respect people a lot more, and the different sort of attitudes and approaches that they can bring into it.
Right. I'll wait for you to let me know how it goes.
Yeah. I'll keep you posted.
What was the main motivation that made you shift to a managerial role?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because I think it came in time with a few things. Like, part of it was thinking maybe I've got the right skill set for it. I always thought that I get on relatively well with people, and that's felt like a strength. But I think the other thing was like frustrations. So I started to get more frustrated as a developer with some of the high level things that I wanted to have changed, and I didn't really have the influence to go and change that. Not kind of necessarily the role where I was. So I guess I wanted to try and climb in a different direction there to see whether I could start to have more influence and basically fix the things that frustrate me. And then you start to do that, and you're like, oh, this is good. Like, kind of building influence, and I'm making myself happy effectively by tackling some of those frustrations. So I think, like influence is kind of a nice thing to have, a nice thing to build up. It's one of the benefits of definitely engineering management, as opposed to the more like technical track, where you get to kind of play around with cool tech all the time. But from the engineering management side, you get to build that influence. It doesn't land on your lap. Like, you generally need to kind of go out and actually build it, and then use that. I think we have a concept of Shopify called the trust battery, and so you build up that trust battery, and then you can use that to get things done.
And I think here it's worth mentioning, you were talking about setting expectations right before, and oftentimes people just get caught in a new role without, I don't know, their own willingness to work as a manager. So I think it's very important for people to understand whether they really like managing people or working on a more strategic parts of the software as opposed to hands-on development, because sometimes frustrations can arise just from that, not knowing what to expect and not being certain that you really want to jump in to something new instead of just working independently as a developer.
Yeah, I think it's quite a hard problem, actually, to sort of give people that test bed to try it out. The last thing can happen, like you can put someone in a team lead role and then they can decide they don't like it. And then you've got to sort of work out what to do. Like, do they go back to being senior dev? Was it a promotion and a pay rise of that company? That's not always the case, but if it is, then that's an awkward conversation to have. So I think, finding kind of other ways to get the feeling right, first of all, is good. And I think mentoring is something I see a lot more in the industry now than we used to. Like in the early years, I don't think there was much kind of in the way of mentoring. I think that's a really good way of sort of doing it, because you'll either do mentoring and find it really positive helping someone, or you'll just be like frustrated and it's not necessarily for you. So trying out sort of the different aspects of it where you can. And I think often people say, you know, like before promoting someone to a role, they're probably doing a good chunk of that work already. So that's probably the case in a lot of engineering management things, that people, maybe kind of leading a technical project. And then they might do a little breakaway team to work on that. So definitely sort of creating opportunities. And I think that's something like, I guess as the industry and as other tech leaders out there can try and do that, is to try and give people that opportunity to put their toes in the water without necessarily committing too heavily in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What was your hardest moment so far as an engineering manager?
I think my hardest moment probably so far was putting someone on a performance improvement plan. But the hardest part was just actually having the conversation, I think, to say, this is the thing that's going to happen. That like you get yourself ready for that conversation. And it was a bit like giving a public presentation. I sort of practiced a little bit at home to make sure I could deliver that message correctly. But doing the actual performance improvement plan wasn't that difficult. It was just the kind of the break in the ice a little bit, and that was even with a good amount of kind of feedback. So it wasn't a complete surprise for them. But that's, I think, one of the hardest things you can sort of have to do is run through that process. But it's normally that conversation that starts it all off that's the hardest part, and then once you've done that, you can kind of relax into it, and work together on it.
There's this question, how many years of experience qualifies you as an engineering manager? And you mentioned earlier that you don't have an engineering degree, so maybe we can, connect the two and talk a bit about that.
Yeah. I think like the engineering or computer science degree is an interesting topic. So throughout my career, I often felt there were certain things that I just didn't have that people with a computer science degree did have. It would become apparent in some technical conversations that I lacked skills in certain areas. But I think so my degree was product design, and that actually started to pay off a bit more because I'd have a keener eye to product. And you probably wouldn't want a team of people with product design degrees as engineers. But I think if you had a team of people where half of them have computer science degrees, you maybe have some product design, you maybe have some psychology degrees, a real mix of stuff. I think that can bring a lot to a team. So I think like a mix of backgrounds, not just in terms of degrees, like other parts of it, but I think degree, that side of the degrees part is interesting. And then, I wonder, kind of looking back, whether I progressed slightly slower in some areas, maybe through technical career could have been slower without that degree. But I think in the management track, it's certainly becomes slightly less relevant because the skills that you're using are slightly different. Trying to remember what we said early on there. You started with, there's a couple of things, wasn't there, on there? Like how many years to qualify you? Yeah, I mean, that's a question, isn't there? In terms of like being a senior engineer, sometimes it's how many years do you need to be a mid-level before being a senior? And I don't think years is kind of the right thing. It's one factor to take into account. But I think in terms of like, what have you done in that time? Like, I've worked with some developers who have done so much in 2 years, and therefore become senior based off the back of that. And then others that have had a more relaxed approach while they focus on other things because their drive is in different areas. So I don't think years is necessarily the right kind of approach, but yeah, I think it's probably not the right approach to talk about years. I'm trying to think how many years. Certainly, like I think as a developer, I must have been like more than 10 years, but that's not the case. For most people, I would say you could advance a bit less than that if you were certain that that's the path you wanted to take. But I also do think that people sometimes need to relax into it a little bit. I've worked with people that are in their 20s. Looking to kind of get into that engineering management role, looking to progress, and then by the time they're 30, they'll be CTO, and then they've still got another like maybe 35 working years of their life, and there's not enough. It's not easy to necessarily progress in the computer game style just to get to kind of that last level. You've got to somewhere find some happiness. If you're happy progressing, that's good, but eventually you're going to start to hit stumbling blocks. Or not, like maybe you're the next Elon Musk, but we probably aren't all of us in that situation. So I think it's sort of taking it at the pace that you're happy with, and just having that kind of, your career is long. So think about how you want it to change. I think also career paths. I've heard the phrase jungle gym, which I quite like for a career path, and mine certainly kind of like that, in terms of the disciplines that I've sort of worked in and the seniority as well, like kind of moving up, moving down, and just mixing it up to kind of make sure that you're happy with what you do.
Do you think it's possible? It's probably possible, but would someone be effective as an engineer manager if they got a degree for, I don't know, project management or engineering management? I'm not sure if there are any specific degrees that focus on that. And then start on the job without any practical experience?
I'm inclined to say no on that one. Like, I think the practical experience does help, but it's a bit less quantifiable. I think, like you definitely build up intuition throughout the years of sort of being a developer, and you do take that intuition in with you. And I think the people in your team, they want to know that you've had that same technical background, that you've been in some of the situations that they're in. So as a developer, we probably all have those days where we literally spend an entire day just trying to fix one line of code. And it's a disastrous thing because you just can't get it done, and everyone's like, what have you done, like, the last day, when the pull request finally comes through and it's a one-line piece of code. And if your engineer manager hasn't lived that out, they're gonna be like, what have you been doing for the last day? So I definitely think that experience is good to have sort of lived it, so you can relate to the people like in your team.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what else.
I have one of those just before coming to the school, and it was a missing comma. It sunk about 2 hours into it.
Oh, wow. How do you know when you're prepared to take this step forward as a developer?
From developer to engineering manager?
I guess so, yes.
Well, that's a good question, because I certainly in the past read the signals wrong on that one. I think I kind of dabbled around with it and was like, it's not quite right. I think for me the turning point was when I really kind of believed in the disciplines, the skills required for engineering management, that they became more tangible for me. But I guess the path that I took a while. Like, I didn't sort of go from developer to engineering manager overnight. I would say it took like a year, maybe even 2 years, to slowly shift. Even in terms of like the things that you read, the blog posts that you read, I was slowly kind of shifting from more technical things, like reading like a Kafka manual or something, to reading blogs on engineering management, and sort of shifting that. But that progress didn't happen overnight. In terms of like when it was ready, I think it just suddenly felt like it clicked a lot more in my head. And I was happy, like this is a real thing. This is a real discipline. And there is a real refined set of skills there. It can just sometimes feel a bit less tangible at first.
Did you feel ready when you first started? So did you jump from a senior developer to a head of engineering in your previous company, or was it a smaller transition?
Yeah, it was smaller. So I went from senior engineer to engineering manager for a team. And then from that team, I went to be the head of engineering at another company. So that's kind of managing multiple teams, and a sort of a bigger remit. And they're very different challenges. Sort of landing in a brand new area is quite different to build up those relationships, like I said. But the shift to suddenly be leading the team is quite different as well. So I think I was ready in terms of I wanted a challenge, I wanted a change, and I was pretty sure this was it. I certainly wasn't ready in terms of skills. Like anything, you've got to kind of do it and mess up and hope that people forgive you in those early days, and give you kind of a bit more time, and make sure you're in the right environment where it's like a safe space and people are going to help you to get through it. So yeah, I would say I was ready in terms of like ready mentally to do the challenge, but you're never going to be perfect at it. It's going to take a bit of time to get it right.
Yeah. You mentioned reading blogs about engineering management. Do you have some favorites that you can share? I think that connects well with the book question before.
Yeah, so there's one called Tech Manager Weekly that I think comes out on a Monday, and that's basically kind of a digest of lots of other blogs. So I guess that's kind of where I go. So I don't necessarily subscribe to many sort of individual blogs, but just kind of go in from there from a lot of stuff. Yeah, and that often links out to people like Lara Hogan or Harvard Business Review. They often have some good posts on there. So there's more content there that you can probably read, unless you've got a lot of spare time. So you have to kind of, I guess, pick through the things that you think are interested, or you think, oh, that's a problem that I have in day-to-day life. I'll have a read of that and see how useful it might be.
Great. Okay, this is an interesting question. Aside from sourcing and hiring that you do right now, what are a few main differences from being an engineering manager than team leader?
I guess they're kind of the same things, I think. Well, it depends on the company, right? So I think team lead, engineer manager, we call them, at Shopify, call them development managers. But they can kind of all, the name is a bit abstract, really, because an engineer manager could mean many different things at different companies. And I think there's that attribution exercise I was talking about, the Patrick Cool one, which kind of links to the different responsibilities on an engineer manager, and I think that's sort of worth doing. So I think they're probably the same role, but there is that kind of tech lead role that still kind of exists at some companies. We don't necessarily, at Shopify, we don't really have that, but I think we have the technical track, which has staff engineers and senior staff engineers, and that's probably the equivalent of that. But there's definitely similarities. There's a lot of overlap between a staff engineer and an engineering manager, in terms of a staff engineer needs to work, get to know the team a lot more, and needs to instill technical best practice and get people to buy into their ideas. So they have certainly a lot of people skills, are needed in that side as well.
Okay. Someone asked if a freelancer is a good candidate for becoming an engineering manager.
Say again that one.
Is a freelancer a good candidate for being a development manager? Like probably someone external to the organization.
Yeah, as in someone that's been a freelancer in the past, or
I'm guessing someone who is not working for the organization, but becoming an engineering manager as, I don't know, a freelancer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have I think in the past we, at least in the UK, we have the concept of freelancers that often, work on multiple different projects for multiple different clients. And then we also have contractors that are people that, just work for a company for a finite amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then, they don't necessarily kind of have the same company benefits and aren't necessarily there for the long term. So it depends which freelancer it is. I think if it's a freelancer that's someone that's worked for themselves for a while, and kind of manage multiple projects and manage clients, and then they want to move into engineering management as a permanent role in a company, that could be good. They probably have something they can bring to it. They wouldn't necessarily have led people as much if they're working for themselves, but they certainly had different experiences in terms of dealing with clients and that kind of thing. So it could be the right person. It might depend on the team. And in terms of if it's a contractor, someone that's just sort of temporary, generally, I think I go for no on that one. I think it's better if someone's in there for the long term. If they signed up to the company mission and they want to kind of see it through, because it takes so long to build up those relationships within teams. That to suddenly appear, be an engineering manager for 6 months and then leave, it's not so bad for the engineering manager, but it's quite detrimental for the people in the team, I think. To kind of get in that stable place and build that trust, and then to have it upended and have someone else kind of appear.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I'm not sure if this is follow-up to your answer from before, or was asked previously, so I will just read it and you can tell us if you have anything to add. So are there staff engineers at Shopify, and how the engineering manager roles differs from that one?
Yeah, so there is staff engineer roles. Obviously, I haven't worked with the staff engineers yet. So just quickly, in terms of the career tracks, senior is generally the branching point at Shopify, and I think quite a few other companies. And then from there, you branch off to engineering manager, senior engineer manager, director, or the other side to staff engineer, senior staff engineer, and principal. So the responsibilities are quite different. A staff engineer probably won't be out kind of sourcing people. They're probably not going to be in as many one-to-ones. Yeah, it could be they actually line manage someone, but it's certainly not going to be their primary discipline. But they're going to be involved very much in the technical strategy, especially depending on the nature of the work. Does it need a staff engineer? Not every project's going to need a super senior engineer on it if it's a relatively straightforward piece of tech. So I think it depends a lot on the project. But they're similar roles in a way, but one's just much more tech focused than the other.
So the one would be staff engineer would be more focused on the architecture and designing the code and everything, and then the engineering manager more on the managing the people and making sure the developers are effective.
Yeah, and looking after things like the developers' growth, we sort of like basically own the careers and help the careers of those developers. That's definitely something that falls in the engineering management side, like finding opportunities for people. But then part of that is obviously knowing the staff engineer as well. So the bigger your network, the more information you have, and then the more you can help grow people's careers, because you'll know opportunities coming up. And if somebody wants to move into staff engineering, it's good to know some staff engineers to know the kind of projects they work on and the strengths. So that's where I think, as an engineering manager, I'll most likely have a multidisciplinary team, so front end and back end, probably some infrastructure people. So I won't have the tech expertise in all those areas. So I'll definitely help them with growth and career progression and that kind of thing. But someone like a staff engineer that has the same discipline as them would be a good mentor from a technical point of view. So the people skills still definitely relevant.
Great. 2 more questions and we can wrap up.
Yeah, cool.
So the first one is, what are the most important soft skills for engineering managers? And the second, the biggest lesson that you have learned from managing so far?
In terms of soft skills, that's a good question. Like being good with people is just quite vague, isn't it? I think in terms of an answer. But I think it's just the ability to, for me anyway, to sort of just build up a natural rapport with someone, to get that trust. And so like a bit of vulnerability here and there is pretty good, to kind of, to give a bit back as well. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the other one's a bit easier in terms of the things that I've learned. Are things like kind of giving feedback quickly, making decisions relatively quickly. Like in the past, I think there's a decision that needs to be made and I couldn't make it. I wasn't getting enough information, and that was a bad time for the team, because everyone was at loggerheads, because we were just in this limbo state. So I think those are the things that you sort of learn, to kind of quickly feedback on things and quickly close down issues that need to be closed down. The best people skills. Yeah, I don't
know. Great. I think, the whole conversation answered that question essentially. So building trust and being able to discuss with people, and those are maybe it's not something that you can quantify or put into words, but
it's
everything
difficult.
was in the same direction.
And I think I read somewhere to bring your own style to what you do, and I definitely kind of like that. Like everyone has a very different style of how they do it, and I think you do have to sort of be true to your own style on that one, and not necessarily emulate someone else's. So it's good to be influenced by people, and if you have good peers around you, there's certainly bits of what they do you're like, I should be a bit more like that. But I think you need to sort of be true to yourself, and that will certainly help as well.
And it would help in building trust and making sure you have a genuine connection with people you manage.
Yeah, because people know that you're sort of coming. This is you. You're kind of bringing your whole self to work, and there's certainly bits that you have to dial up when you come to work. Like you don't necessarily have to be extroverted or to be an engineering manager. Like I certainly wouldn't consider myself that. But there's bits that you have to sort of be aware of and maybe dial up a bit more. So yeah, but I guess probably like putting yourself out of your comfort zone is a key part. It's probably the same for being a developer, to be honest. Like if you're just being comfortable, you're probably not progressing. As a developer, that probably means that you need to go and learn some new tech skills. And as an engineering manager, it probably means you need to have some awkward conversations that you've been putting off to see how they go.
Great. Do you have any final thoughts to add, or is that how we can end this?
Yeah, it's most of it. I mean, we did chat a bit earlier about kind of work-life balance, and that's kind of an interesting subject. So I think my tips for work-life balance are like delete Slack from your phone and delete your work emails, but don't delete PagerDuty if you're on call. That'll get you in trouble. And I think just keeping in terms of work-life balance, just get that kind of laser focus during your working hours, and then then you can have more time in your spare time to do stuff. that I was putting the kids to bed last night and I was singing nursery rhymes probably for over half an hour straight, and I was sitting there thinking, this isn't great for my career. This is like a detrimental thing, whereas I could be preparing for this conversation, but instead I'm sitting here in the dark singing nursery rhymes. So I think that work-life balance is interesting. And we didn't talk about side projects. There's kind of another topic there, the sort of the power of the side project. And how, like, if you have that time to do it, that can be a really strong thing. But if you don't have that time to do it, it can be really frustrating to see, your peers progressing faster because they have that ability to sort of boost their career by investing time in that. So I guess my closing thought on that one is to not compare yourself with other people that do have that time. Just sort of be true to yourself and try and find your own happiness. Drive it at your own pace and do the things that you want to do. So if you're going a bit slower at work, but you're happy with achievements that you're doing outside, then focus on that.
That's an amazing way to wrap up this session. Thank you, Andy, again for being my guest today. And thanks everyone who joined. I really loved the discussion, especially because we had so much time to answer audience questions and people were really engaged. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This video will go there. You can follow up on some pieces if you missed something or just rewatch it. And then we'll see you again next month.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.